The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the bustling streets of Queens as Thomas Parker wandered aimlessly. His tailored suit, immaculate and expensive, clashed with the somber expression on his face. His steps carried him away from the polished towers and luxury boutiques of the upper city to a quieter, more unassuming part of Queens. In his pocket was the invitation to Chloe's wedding, his ex-fiancée, and it felt heavier than it should, a physical weight of unresolved emotions and lingering pain. Bitterness swirled in his chest, mingling with an almost desperate determination to prove he had moved on. Even if, deep down, he knew it was a facade. As he walked, something caught his eye, a slight movement in the park. On a worn bench sat a woman who was unmistakably homeless. Her clothes were frayed, her belongings gathered into a small, battered bag at her feet. Yet she was reading. Her thin hands held a well-worn copy of a book, its pages threatening to spill loose. What struck Thomas wasn't her appearance, it was the quiet dignity she carried, the unyielding intelligence reflected in her eyes as she turned a page. Driven by an impulse he didn't fully understand, Thomas approached. "Excuse me," he began, his voice unsure. The woman looked up, her face lined with the wear of a hard life. Yet, beneath it, there was a haunting beauty, something resilient and unbroken. "Yes," she answered, her voice surprisingly melodic, a note of guarded curiosity laced within. "I'm Thomas Parker," he introduced himself, his nerves catching him off guard. I have a proposition for you." Her brow arched slightly. Wariness flickered across her features, mingled with intrigue. "I'm Ella," she said simply. "What kind of proposition?" For a moment Thomas faltered. The absurdity of his idea pressed down on him like an invisible hand, but the image of Chloe in her wedding gown, glowing at another man's side, pushed him forward. "I need a date," he explained in a rush, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "To a wedding. My ex-fiancée's wedding, to be precise." Ella slowly closed her book, her sharp gaze never leaving his face. "And why?" she asked, her voice cool but tinged with dry humor. "Would you want to take someone like me to your ex-fiancée's wedding?" Thomas felt his face grow warm. "To make an impression," he admitted. "To show her that I've moved on." A small, wry smile tugged at Ella's lips. "Ah, revenge," she mused. "The purest motive of them all." Her sarcasm stung, but Thomas pressed on. "I'll pay you," he added quickly. "Enough for you two. Start fresh. If that's what you want." Ella's expression shifted. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying him as though she were trying to decipher a puzzle. And what, exactly, would this fresh start entail? "A complete transformation," he explained, his confidence growing as he spoke. "New clothes. A polished look. Etiquette lessons if needed. For a few weeks you'd be someone entirely new, someone who could walk into any room and turn heads." A low, bitter laugh escaped Ella's lips. "And you think you can turn me into some modern-day Cinderella just like that?" "No," Thomas replied, his tone unexpectedly soft, almost earnest. "I think there's already something special about you, something that can't be taught or bought. I just want to give you the chance to let the world see it." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The gentle rustling of leaves and the distant hum of city life filled the air. Ella seemed to wrestle with an internal debate, emotions flickering across her face. Finally, she broke the stillness. "Why me?" she asked. "Of all the people in this city, why choose someone who has nothing?" Thomas met her gaze, his own steady. "Because you have dignity," he said quietly. "Even here, sitting on this bench, reading what is it, Shakespeare?" Ella nodded, her cheeks coloring faintly. "You have a strength I can't ignore," he continued. "And maybe, because you have nothing to lose but everything to gain." Ella considered his words carefully. Then, as if making a decision that would change the course of her life, she spoke. "And if I say no?" "Then I'll wish you all the best and move on," Thomas replied, his tone honest. "But I hope you'll say yes." Her eyes closed briefly, as if summoning courage from within. When they opened, they were filled with determination. "All right, Mr. Parker," she said, extending her hand. "I'll take your offer." Relief flooded through Thomas as he took her hand, her grip firm and unexpectedly warm. "Shall we begin?" he asked. But Ella hesitated, her expression turning serious. Before we do, she said, you should know I wasn't always like this. I had a life once, a career, and I lost it all. Thomas felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry, he said softly. Ella's gaze hardened slightly. Don't be, she replied. Just understand this, I'm not a charity case, and I won't be a pawn in your game. I'm a person, with history, and dignity. Thomas nodded, a deep respect for this woman beginning to take root. Understood, he promised. As they left the park together, Thomas felt something stir inside him. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was something bigger, something transformative for both of them. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light over the city. For the first time in what felt like ages, Thomas felt a flicker of hope. He glanced at Ella, who walked beside him with her head held high, clutching her battered book like a shield. So he asked, breaking the silence, where do we start? Ella turned to him, an enigmatic smile curling her lips. At the beginning, Mr. Parker. Always at the beginning. And so, beneath the Velvet Queen's sky, their unlikely partnership began a journey destined to challenge expectations and rewrite both of their stories. The morning sun filtered through the silk curtains of Thomas Parker's penthouse apartment, casting a golden glow over Ella, who lay sleeping soundly in one of the guest bedrooms. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, disoriented by the luxurious softness of the Egyptian sheets and the almost deafening silence around her. For a brief moment, she wondered if she was still dreaming. The cream-colored walls, elegant furnishings, and breathtaking view of Queens seemed like remnants of a world she'd left behind long ago. A soft knock at the door pulled her back to reality. Ella Thomas's voice came from the other side. Are you awake? We have a busy day ahead. Sitting up, Ella ran her fingers through her messy hair. I'm awake, she replied, her voice still thick from sleep. When she opened the door, Thomas stood there, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit. His expression flickered for a moment, as if seeing her in a new light. Good morning, he greeted, a faint blush rising to his cheeks. Breakfast is ready. After that, we'll start the makeover. Ella nodded and followed him into the kitchen. The warm aroma of fresh coffee and buttery croissants greeted her, making her stomach rumble audibly. Help yourself, Thomas said, gesturing toward the elegantly set table. You'll need your energy for the day ahead. As they ate, Thomas outlined the plan: a trip to an exclusive beauty salon, followed by a visit to some of the most prestigious boutiques in the city. Ella listened quietly, a mixture of nervousness and cautious excitement stirring within her. Finally, she set down her coffee cup and asked Thomas, why are you doing all this? What's the real reason? He paused, his gaze locking with hers. Honestly, he admitted, at first it was about revenge. But now I think it's more than that. Maybe it's a chance to make a difference, to help someone. Ella studied his face, searching for insincerity, but found only surprising honesty. You know this won't fix the hole Chloe left in your life, don't you? She asked, her voice soft but firm. Thomas looked down for a moment, a bittersweet smile crossing his lips. Maybe it won't. But perhaps it can be the beginning of something better for both of us. The day unfolded in a whirlwind of transformation. At the salon, Ella watched in astonishment as the person staring back at her in the mirror began to change. Her once dull, lifeless hair was now silky and perfectly styled, framing her face with a new elegance. Her hands, once weathered, bore polished nails that gleamed under the lights. At the haute couture boutique, Ella was surrounded by racks of exquisite fabrics and designs that seemed worlds away from her reality. Each dress she tried on unveiled a different facet of her personality, a part of herself she thought had long been buried. As she stepped out of the fitting room in a shimmering emerald gown, Thomas's breath caught. You look incredible, he murmured, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Ella felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Thank you, she said softly, surprised by the emotion in her own voice. Throughout the day, Thomas noticed something remarkable about Ella. Beyond her transformation, she displayed an innate understanding of the world she was re-entering. She conversed effortlessly about art, fashion, and etiquette, as if this life were second nature to her. During lunch at a quiet, upscale restaurant, Thomas couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "You seem familiar with all of this," he said, studying her. "Why?" Ella froze briefly, her fork hovering mid-air, before lowering it. "I wasn't always homeless, Thomas," she said, her voice tinged with a sadness he hadn't seen before. "I once belonged to this world." Leaning forward, he asked gently, "What happened?" Her gaze drifted, as though she were looking into a distant past. "I was an executive, a good one. I had money, status, and a future that seemed so bright. But then, everything unraveled. A scandal, corporate corruption. I was made the scapegoat. And just like that, I lost everything: my career, my reputation, my life." A knot tightened in Thomas's throat. "Ella, I'm so sorry," he said quietly, reaching out to touch her hand. She pulled her hand back gently, giving him a faint, sad smile. "Don't be. I've learned what truly matters in life since then. Loss can be clarifying." That evening, back at the penthouse, Thomas found Ella standing on the balcony, gazing out at the lights of Queens. Her transformed appearance made her look stunning, but it was the quiet melancholy in her posture that caught his attention. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping beside her. Ella turned to him, her lips curving into a soft, enigmatic smile. "I'm just thinking about who I used to be," she said, her voice thoughtful. "And wondering who I am now." Emotion welled up in Thomas. "You're extraordinary," he said, his voice uncharacteristically raw. "No matter how you dress or where you are, you're remarkable." She held his gaze for a long moment, her eyes shimmering with something he couldn't name. "Thank you, Thomas," she said quietly. "Not just for this transformation, but for helping me rediscover myself." Together, they stood in silence, looking out at the city that never seemed to sleep. For Thomas, what had begun as a quest for revenge was evolving into something far deeper. And for the first time in years, he felt alive. Night fell over Queens, its blanket of stars mingling with the glow of the city's lights. On the balcony of the Parker penthouse, two souls both scarred by life's trials found solace in each other. In that quiet moment, without speaking, they both knew their journey had just begun. The ballroom of the Royal Empress Hall sparkled under the glow of hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their light refracting off glittering jewels and the elegant shimmer of designer gowns. It was the evening of the Parker Foundation's prestigious annual charity gala, an event that brought together the elite of Queen's society. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfumes and the hum of whispered expectations. Thomas Parker adjusted his bow tie, a mix of nerves and anticipation tightening in his chest. Beside him, Ella took a steadying breath, her fingers lightly gripping the diamond clutch that perfectly complemented her sapphire blue silk gown. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked, offering her his arm. Ella gave a confident smile, her crimson lips curving slightly. "Born ready," she replied, slipping her arm through his. As the grand double doors opened, every head in the ballroom turned to take in the arrival of the striking pair. Thomas felt a spark of pride as he caught the surprise and admiration etched on the faces of the crowd. Ella, with her poised demeanor, moved as if she were born for this world of opulence and scrutiny. "Thomas, darling," came a high-pitched voice that sliced through the soft buzz of conversation. Grace Parker, his mother, approached, her piercing blue eyes sweeping over Ella from head to toe. "And who is this stunning companion?" "Mom. This is Ella," Thomas introduced smoothly, noticing Ella's subtle tightening of her grip on his arm. "Ella, my mother, Grace Parker." Ella's melodic voice carried a graceful sincerity as she replied, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Parker. Your son has been an exceptional host." Grace raised one perfectly groomed eyebrow, her tone laced with skepticism as she murmured, "I'm sure he has. Thomas has always had unique taste in company." Before Thomas could respond, a familiar figure glided toward them. Chloe, his ex-fiancée, looked radiant in a form-fitting red gown. Her fiancé, Lucas, followed close behind, appearing uncomfortably out of place in his tailored tuxedo. Thomas Chloe greeted, her gaze flickering to Ella with thinly veiled surprise. "What an unexpected pleasure." "Chloe," Thomas replied, feeling a familiar tension settle in his chest. "You look stunning, as always. May I introduce Ella?" Chloe extended her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Charmed, she said coolly. I don't believe we've met. Are you new to Queens? Ella returned the handshake with unshakable grace. Not exactly, she said softly. I've lived here before, just stepped away for a while. Chloe's brow furrowed slightly. Oh? And what circles did you frequent? Ella's lips curved in a sly smile. The same as yours, I imagine. Though I've come to learn there's more to life than sororities and social whispers. A charged silence hung between them, broken only when Chloe gave a tight smile and excused herself, tugging a bewildered Lucas along. Thomas couldn't help but notice the brief glance Lucas cast at Ella, one of admiration and intrigue. Throughout the evening, Ella continued to astonish Thomas. She navigated the room with effortless charm, engaging in discussions about art with a celebrated curator, exchanging sharp political insights with a senator, and even trading French quips with a foreign diplomat. During a quieter moment, Thomas leaned toward her and asked, How do you know so much about all this? Ella smiled faintly, her eyes clouded with bittersweet recollection. It comes from a lifetime of experiences, some joyful, some painful, but all valuable lessons. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Thomas extended a hand toward her. Shall we? He asked with a small bow. They glided across the floor, their movements synchronized in perfect harmony. With each step, Thomas found himself more captivated by the enigmatic woman in his arms. Ella wasn't simply playing a part to bolster his pride, she was a mystery, one he felt compelled to unravel. You're incredible out there, he whispered, steering her through a graceful turn. Thank you, she replied, her voice steady but her gaze thoughtful. But remember, Thomas, this is just a performance. Don't let it blur reality. Her words struck him unexpectedly, a reminder that his growing admiration for her might already be crossing boundaries he hadn't anticipated. From across the ballroom, Chloe watched the pair with a mixture of unease and fascination. Turning to Lucas, who had found solace in a conversation about stocks, she muttered, Who is she? And why does Thomas seem so changed with her? Lucas glanced briefly at the couple and shrugged. Maybe he's finally letting go. You should too. Ignoring the jab, Chloe kept her focus on Thomas and Ella. There was an undeniable connection between them, as if they shared a secret no one else could comprehend. As the gala drew to a close, whispers about Thomas Parker's intriguing date had spread like wildfire. Guests speculated about her identity, her past, and how she had captivated the most eligible bachelor in Queens. When they finally stepped into the awaiting limousine, Ella exhaled deeply, the weight of the evening lifting. You were magnificent, Thomas said, his voice sincere as he reached for her hand. Thank you for tonight. Ella turned to him, her expression softening. Thank you, Thomas. For a moment I felt like myself again. Their conversation tapered off into a comfortable silence, but unspoken possibilities lingered in the air. As the car rolled through the dimly lit streets of Queens, Thomas realized he was questioning everything: his motives, his choices, and what Ella truly meant to him. Back at the penthouse, Ella stood on the balcony, the city's lights twinkling beneath the dark sky. Thomas joined her, his presence quiet but grounding. What's next? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas gazed at her, seeing not only her beauty but the resilience and complexity she carried. We keep going. More events, more opportunities for you to shine, and maybe, along the way, we'll figure out more about ourselves. A soft smile touched Ella's lips. That sounds risky. The best things in life usually are, Thomas replied with a faint grin. Together they stood on the edge of a journey neither could fully predict. Beneath the stars, two lives, once adrift, began to intertwine in ways that would forever change them both. The morning sun poured through the curtains of Thomas Parker's apartment, bathing the room in a soft golden light. On the balcony, Ella sat quietly, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands as her sleepy eyes scanned the newspaper spread across the glass table. Suddenly she froze. Her face turned pale and the cup trembled in her grasp, spilling a few drops onto the paper. It can't be, she whispered, her fingers tracing the lines of the article with disbelief. Minutes later, Thomas stepped onto the balcony, his face etched with concern. Ella, is everything okay? He asked gently. She looked up at him, her eyes a mix of shock and pain. "Thomas," she said, her voice unsteady. "We need to talk." Thomas lowered himself into the chair across from her, his worry deepening. "What's wrong?" he asked. Ella pushed the newspaper toward him. "Read this," she said simply. The article detailed an investigation into a massive corporate scandal from years prior. One name leaped off the page: Parker Enterprises. Thomas frowned as he skimmed the story. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with you?" Ella drew in a deep breath, closing her eyes briefly before opening them with renewed determination. "Do you remember when I told you I lost everything because of a corporate conspiracy? This is it, and your company, Thomas, was at the center of it all." Her words hit him like a hammer. "What? That's impossible. How?" "I was CFO of US Tech at the time," Ella explained, her voice steadying as she recounted the painful memory. "I uncovered irregularities in the accounts, a conspiracy linking several companies. When I tried to bring the truth to light, I was silenced. I lost my career, my reputation, everything." Thomas stood abruptly, pacing back and forth as her revelation sank in. "There must be some mistake," he muttered, shaking his head. "My father would never." Ella interrupted softly. "Maybe Henry didn't know the full extent of it. But someone high up at Parker Enterprises was involved, and I paid the price." The heavy silence that followed seemed to echo the weight of unspoken truths. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. Finally, he stopped pacing and faced her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his tone laced with frustration and hurt. Ella looked at him with quiet sadness. "At first, I didn't know you were connected to Parker Enterprises. And later, well, things got complicated." Thomas stared at her, his voice almost breaking. "How complicated?" Ella hesitated before speaking softly. "I started to care about you in ways I didn't expect." Thomas felt his heart lurch, but confusion and guilt quickly clouded his emotions. "I need answers," he said, his voice firm. "If my family had any involvement, I have to find out." Ella nodded, standing to meet his gaze. "I understand. But Thomas, be prepared. The truth isn't always what you want to hear." For the rest of the day, Thomas dove headfirst into uncovering the truth. He made calls, poured through old records, and reached out to every possible connection. From a distance, Ella watched him, her heart heavy with the burden she had placed on him. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the weight on Thomas's shoulders became almost visible. Finally, he set his phone down and turned to her, his face filled with a mix of devastation and anger. "You were right," he said hoarsely. "My father, Henry, he knew. He may not have orchestrated it, but he allowed it to happen. He turned a blind eye to the corruption for profits." Ella approached him cautiously, her voice soft but firm. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. I never wanted." He raised a hand to stop her. "Don't apologize. None of this is your fault. If anything, I owe you an apology for everything you've endured because of my family." Gently, Ella placed a hand on his arm. "You're not accountable for your father's decisions, Thomas. That's not on you." "Maybe not," he conceded, his jaw tightening, "but I am responsible for making it right." In that moment, something shifted between them. What had started as an arrangement born of convenience had evolved into a bond forged in truth, pain, and mutual respect. "What's your next move?" Ella asked quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. Thomas looked at her with a steely resolve. "I'm going to expose the truth, no matter what it costs me. But, Ella, I can't ask you to stand by me. You've already sacrificed too much because of Parker Enterprises." Ella stepped closer, her hands enveloping his. Her gaze was steady and unwavering. "You don't have to ask, Thomas. I'm staying not just for justice, but for us. For what we've built together." Their eyes locked, and in that shared moment, years of pain and hope seemed to intertwine. Both understood that their journey was far from over, but together, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, Thomas Parker and Ella worked tirelessly to gather evidence, meticulously building a case against those responsible for the scandal. Each new discovery seemed to strengthen the bond between them, creating a connection far deeper than the pretense they had started with. One evening, drained from hours of intense work, they found themselves on the balcony of Thomas's apartment. The city lights stretched endlessly before them, shimmering like stars scattered across the skyline. Thomas turned to Ella, his gaze filled with an emotion he could no longer suppress. "Ella," he began, his voice trembling. "I know this started as a game, a lie. But what I feel for you now, it's the most genuine thing I've ever known." Ella's heart raced at his words, her breath catching. "Thomas," she began, but her response was cut short by the sudden ring of his phone. Thomas frowned apologetically as he answered the call, his lawyer delivering urgent updates about the case. Ella leaned against the railing, watching his profile silhouetted against the vibrant Queen's night sky. She realized they were standing on the brink of something monumental, not just in their pursuit of justice but in their personal lives as well. The road ahead, she knew, would not be easy. It would demand sacrifices, bring heartbreak, and test their resolve. Yet, as she stood there, gazing at the city below and feeling the weight of her truth begin to lift, Ella allowed herself to hope. Not just for justice, but for a new beginning, a chance to rebuild her life alongside someone who truly saw her. When Thomas ended the call and turned to her, their eyes met. No words passed between them, but they didn't need any. The understanding was mutual. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The night grew darker, but the city pulsed with possibilities. On that balcony, two broken souls found solace in one another, ready to weather the challenges to come together. In another part of Queens, Chloe gazed at her reflection in the full-length mirror, her wedding dress fitting perfectly yet feeling strangely foreign. Her normally confident eyes now seemed clouded with hesitation. For the umpteenth time, she adjusted the gown, searching for a flaw that didn't exist. "You look beautiful, dear," her mother, Grace Parker, said as she entered the room with a practiced smile. "Lucas will be thrilled." Chloe nodded absent-mindedly, but her thoughts wandered elsewhere. Her mind drifted back to the charity ball, to the way Thomas had looked at Ella as they danced. She recognized that look all too well. It was the way he used to look at her. "Mom," Chloe asked hesitantly, her voice soft. "Have you ever wondered if you're doing the right thing, even when everything seems perfect on the surface?" Grace paused, her smile faltering for the briefest moment before it returned, tight and strained. "Sweetheart, it's just pre-wedding jitters. It happens to everyone." But Chloe knew this unease ran deeper. Over the past few weeks, she had been a storm of conflicting emotions. Seeing Thomas and Ella together at events, in the media, and haunting her dreams had stirred a jealousy she didn't want to admit, and a regret she couldn't escape. "I need some air," Chloe muttered, brushing past her mother and out the door. She wandered through the mansion's sprawling gardens, the damp grass brushing against the hem of her dress. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the day all of Queens would celebrate her union with Lucas. Yet, as the hours ticked by, Chloe felt like the only person dreading it. Her steps led her to an old oak tree, one that had stood witness to so much of her history. It was here, nearly 2 years ago, that Thomas had knelt before her, ring in hand, his eyes brimming with hope and love. The memory of his nervous laugh, the sparkle of the diamond, and her whispered yes flooded her mind. "What's changed?" she asked the quiet night air. "Maybe the better question is, what hasn't?" a familiar voice replied. Chloe spun around to see Ella standing a few steps away. Dressed in a simple blue dress, Ella's presence was understated yet commanding. "Ella," Chloe said, her voice a mix of surprise and caution. "Why are you here?" Ella stepped closer, her expression calm but resolute. "I came to talk, Chloe, about Thomas. About you. About everything." Chloe's heart raced, her defenses rising. "There's nothing to talk about. I'm getting married tomorrow." "Are you?" Ella asked softly, her gaze steady. "Because you don't look like a bride who's happy." The words struck like a blow, and Chloe felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Still, she held her composure. "You don't know anything about me." "I know more than you think," Ella replied, her voice firm but kind. "I know you still love Thomas, and I know he still cares for you." Chloe shook her head, confusion and frustration colliding. "Then why are you here? Why aren't you fighting for him?" Ella offered a sad smile. Because it's not about me, Chloe. It's about you and Thomas finally confronting the truth you've been avoiding. The weight of Ella's words settled between them. Chloe lowered herself onto a nearby bench, tears spilling freely. I don't know what to do, she confessed, her voice trembling. I love Lucas, I really do. But Thomas, he'll always be my first love. Ella sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. First love is powerful, Chloe, but it's not always the love that lasts. Chloe looked at her, startled by the compassion in Ella's voice. How can you be so understanding? I thought you hated me. Ella shook her head. Hate only creates more pain, Chloe. And we've all endured enough of that. For the first time, Chloe saw Ella not as a rival but as someone who understood her pain intimately. What happened to you, Ella? Chloe asked quietly. How did you end up here? Ella's eyes softened as they drifted into the past. It's a long story. One of betrayal, loss, and eventually, redemption. But right now we're here for you, not me. Chloe nodded, feeling a connection she hadn't expected. What should I do? Be honest with yourself, Ella said gently. And with Lucas. He deserves the truth, whatever that may be. Chloe stood suddenly, resolve hardening in her features. I need to talk to Thomas, she said. Before it's too late. Ella nodded, her gaze filled with understanding. Do what you have to, Chloe. But remember, sometimes letting go is the truest form of love. Chloe hesitated, then gave Ella a small, grateful smile. Thank you, she whispered before turning and walking briskly back toward the mansion. Ella watched her go, her heart heavy yet peaceful. Love, she had learned, was not about possession. It was about setting someone free. Meanwhile, in his Queen's apartment, Thomas Parker sat surrounded by papers and documents, immersed in the task of unraveling the scandal that had shattered Ella's life. The intensity of his focus was such that he didn't hear the door open. When he looked up, he was startled to see Chloe standing there, still dressed in her wedding gown. Thomas, she said softly. He blinked, disbelief etched on his face. Chloe? What are you doing here? Chloe stepped further into the room, tears glistening in her eyes. We need to talk, Thomas. About us. About everything, the past, the future. Thomas stood slowly, his pulse quickening. He knew instinctively that this moment would alter their lives forever. Chloe, he began, his voice unsteady. But before he could finish, the shrill ring of his phone interrupted him. It was his lawyer calling with urgent updates on the case. Thomas hesitated, torn between the conversation he'd long dreaded and the mission that now consumed his every thought. Chloe saw the conflict in his expression and smiled faintly, though sadness tinged her features. Take the call, she said quietly. Some things are more important than us. Thomas reluctantly answered, his eyes briefly meeting Chloe's before he turned his attention to the conversation. Chloe watched him closely, the man she had once loved so deeply. But this wasn't the same Thomas she had known. The passion in his eyes, the resolve in his demeanor, this was someone transformed by a greater purpose. With a heavy heart, yet strangely at peace, Chloe turned and walked away. She now understood what she needed to do. As night fell over Queens, three souls grappled with their truths. Chloe, preparing to make one of the hardest choices of her life. Thomas, struggling to reconcile the past with his newfound sense of purpose. And Ella, watching from a distance, her heart burdened yet her conscience clear. Fate had intertwined their lives in ways none could have foreseen, leaving the future uncertain and brimming with possibility. The ballroom of the Royal Empress Hall shimmered under the glow of countless candles. The gentle notes of a string quartet mingled with soft murmurs of conversation, setting the stage for Chloe's rehearsal dinner. The event should have been a celebration of joy and hope for the future, yet an undercurrent of tension filled the room, unspoken truths waiting to surface. Thomas adjusted his bow tie, scanning the crowded hall for Ella. She stood across the room in an elegant emerald green gown, her laughter echoing softly as she chatted with a group of guests. Their eyes met, and Thomas's heart gave an involuntary leap. In just a short time, everything about his life had changed. Nearby, Chloe watched them, her emotions a tangle of sorrow and resignation. The white cocktail dress she wore felt heavier than it should, a constant reminder of a future she no longer felt certain about. "Are you all right, darling?" Lucas asked, placing a reassuring hand on her back. Chloe forced a smile. "Yes, just a little nervous." Before Lucas could respond, a buzz of whispers swept through the room. Henry Parker, Thomas's father, had arrived, his expression thunderous as he strode purposefully toward his son. "Thomas," he bellowed, silencing the room. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" All eyes turned to the impending confrontation. Thomas squared his shoulders, meeting his father's fury with calm determination. "Doing what's right, Dad," he said firmly. "Something that should have been done years ago." Henry grabbed his son's arm, pulling him close. "Do you have any idea what's at stake? What this will do to our family, to Parker Enterprises?" Thomas's voice was steady, though pain flickered in his eyes. "Do you have any idea how many lives have been destroyed by the choices we made? Choices rooted in greed and dishonesty." Ella watched the exchange, her heart pounding. She knew this was a pivotal moment not just for Thomas but for everyone ensnared in the scandal that had ruined her life. Sensing the tension, Chloe approached cautiously. "What's happening?" she asked, her gaze darting between Thomas and Henry. Ella stepped forward, her voice calm yet brimming with emotion. "The truth, Chloe. The truth that's been hidden for far too long." With the room hanging on her every word, Ella recounted her story. She spoke of her rise in the corporate world, her discovery of widespread corruption, and the devastating fallout that followed when she tried to expose it. As Ella's words echoed through the hall, Henry's face paled. Chloe covered her mouth in disbelief, while Lucas, silent until then, stepped forward. "Is it true?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling with anger. "Did Parker Enterprises really do this?" Henry opened his mouth to respond, but Thomas cut him off. "Yes, it's true. And I have the evidence to prove it." Gasps rippled through the crowd as shock and betrayal registered on the faces of friends, family, and colleagues. "You can't do this," Thomas Henry hissed, his desperation evident. "You'll destroy everything we've built." Thomas shook his head, his voice resolute. "No, Dad. I'm saving what little integrity we have left." Chloe, tears glistening in her eyes, stepped forward. Her voice was soft but steady. "Thomas, I see now why you've changed. Why we couldn't make it work." Thomas's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Chloe, Before he could finish, Henry, in a last-ditch act of anger, grabbed a champagne glass and hurled it in Ella's direction. "You've ruined everything," he roared. Time seemed to freeze. Thomas moved instinctively to shield Ella, but it was Chloe who stepped in, positioning herself between Ella and the flying glass. The champagne splattered across her white dress, leaving an indelible stain. "Enough!" Lucas's voice rang out, commanding the room's attention. "Mr. Parker, I think it's time you left." In the chaos that followed, Thomas Parker found himself surrounded by a whirlwind of emotions. He glanced at Chloe, who offered him a bittersweet smile as Lucas wrapped his arms protectively around her. Then his gaze shifted to Ella, her eyes glimmering with a blend of gratitude and deep affection. "Thomas," Ella said softly, her fingers lightly brushing his arm. "You have a decision to make." At that moment, in front of everyone who mattered in his life, Thomas made his choice. He turned first to Chloe and Lucas, the weight in his heart balanced by an odd sense of peace. "Chloe," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "you will always hold a special place in my life, but—" Chloe nodded, her understanding reflected in her watery eyes. "I know, Thomas. Your heart belongs to someone else now." Thomas then turned to Ella, his expression softening as he took her hands in his. "Ella, you've shown me what truly matters: courage, honesty, and love that endures. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of your love." Tears sparkled in Ella's eyes, and a tender smile spread across her face. "I love you too, Thomas. All of you, your flaws and your strengths." The hall, once brimming with confusion and tension, fell silent. All eyes were locked on the couple standing in the spotlight of vulnerability and truth. It was Chloe who broke the silence, her voice tinged with sadness yet filled with sincerity. "Be happy, you two," she said, her smile genuine and kind. "You deserve it." Lucas leaned closer to Chloe, murmuring softly, and as for us, how about we start fresh? No pressures, no expectations, just us. Chloe looked at him, her heart softening as she saw him clearly for the first time in months. I'd like that, she whispered, her voice carrying hope. As the evening wore on, the energy in the room transformed. What had begun as a rehearsal dinner for a wedding shifted into a celebration of authenticity, courage, and new beginnings. Thomas and Ella swayed together in the center of the ballroom, their eyes locked as if the world had fallen away. Across the room, Chloe and Lucas engaged in quiet conversation, rediscovering the love they had once nurtured. On a night that should have been a precursor to one love story, multiple tales of redemption, hope, and forgiveness emerged. The scandal that had shattered so many lives was now set to be exposed, offering a path to healing and justice. As soft music filled the hall, Thomas held Ella closer, his heart swelling with the certainty that he had found his place. Thank you, he whispered into her ear. Ella tilted her head to look at him, curiosity shining in her gaze. For what? For helping me find my way back to myself, Thomas replied, his voice laced with emotion. Ella smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. We're just beginning, Thomas. There's a long road ahead. Under the ballroom's soft lights, two wounded souls found healing in each other, creating a bond forged in truth and love. Though challenges loomed, they faced them together, emboldened by their shared strength. The night that marked the end of one chapter became the prologue to a story far more profound and beautiful. Outside, queens glittered under the evening sky, but within the Royal Empress Hall, love in all its complexity and depth had triumphed. As the first rays of sunlight stretched across Queens, they poured through the windows of Thomas's apartment, illuminating the quiet scene on the balcony. Ella sat there with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The weeks leading up to this moment had been a whirlwind of emotions, but now, in the stillness of the morning, she let herself reflect. Thomas appeared at the door, his features etched with exhaustion, but his eyes held a determination that refused to waver. Good morning, he greeted, stepping onto the balcony to join her. Ella smiled, handing him a cup of coffee. Morning, ready for what lies ahead. Thomas took a slow sip, nodding as he stared out over the city. As ready as I can be. It's time to confront my father and shed light on years of corruption. A heavy silence fell between them, the enormity of their mission pressing down on them both. Finally, Ella spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas, there's something else you need to know. I found something last night. Thomas turned toward her, his brow furrowing in concern. What is it? Ella took a deep breath, steadying herself. Your father wasn't acting alone. The conspiracy is larger than we thought. Involving some of the most influential executives in the country. She hesitated, tears brimming in her eyes. And my downfall. It was orchestrated by someone I trusted deeply, my mentor. Thomas felt a pang in his chest. Who? Jack Ross, Ella revealed, her voice trembling. The man who guided me, who made me believe I could reshape the corporate world for the better. He was at the center of it all. The revelation hit Thomas like a blow. Jack Ross had been a towering figure, respected and admired by all who knew him. That he could be implicated in such a far-reaching scandal felt almost surreal. Ella, I'm so sorry, Thomas said, pulling her into a firm embrace. But how did you uncover this? Ella stepped back slightly, her expression resolute. I stayed up all night combing through the files we obtained. There's a pattern, Thomas, one that only someone in his position could orchestrate. Thomas nodded, the puzzle pieces slowly aligning in his mind. This changes everything, he murmured. It does, Ella agreed. And that's why we must tread carefully. Jack has allies in every corner of the system. If we're going to expose him, we have to be ready for the storm it will unleash. They sat quietly for a moment, the weight of their shared burden palpable. But in the quiet resolve that passed between them, there was also hope, a shared belief that they could face whatever lay ahead, as long as they stood together. The remainder of the morning blurred into a whirlwind of calls, emails, and last-minute preparations. Thomas Parker and Ella worked tirelessly, combing through the mountain of evidence they had painstakingly gathered over the weeks. By 2 p.m. they arrived at the grandiose Parker Building. The lobby was a frenzy of reporters and flashing cameras, all eager to witness the impromptu press conference. Thomas felt the weight of the moment press against him. Turning to Ella, who stood resolutely beside him, he asked, "Are you sure about this?" Ella met his gaze, her hand tightening briefly around his. "Absolutely. The truth needs to come out." They entered the conference room, a space teeming with executives, journalists, and, to Thomas's astonishment, his father, Henry Parker, seated in the front row with barely concealed anger. As Thomas approached the podium, his heart pounded with the enormity of what he was about to do. Facing the crowd, he steadied himself and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today," he said, his voice steady. "We are here to confront a truth that has been buried for far too long, a truth about corruption, greed, and the destruction of lives in pursuit of profit." The room grew deathly quiet as Thomas laid bare the details of the scandal. He spoke of financial manipulations, unethical dealings, and the countless lives upended by deceit. Then came the turning point. "But perhaps the most shocking part of all," Thomas continued, his voice trembling slightly, "is that this conspiracy was masterminded not only by my father, Henry Parker, but also by one of the most revered figures in our industry, Jack Ross." The room erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Henry Parker stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You have no evidence." Ella stepped forward, her voice unwavering as she addressed the crowd. "But we do," she declared, "and I am living proof of the consequences of their actions." Ella recounted her harrowing story, her rise as a promising executive at US Tech, her discovery of fraudulent activities, and the devastating fallout when she tried to expose the truth. She spoke with a conviction that left the room spellbound, her words painting a vivid picture of betrayal and resilience. Thomas scanned the faces in the room, watching shock give way to understanding and, finally, empathy. He saw his father slump in his chair, his indignation giving way to despair. Then, the doors swung open, and Jack Ross entered, flanked by federal agents. His usual air of authority was gone, replaced by a look of defeat. "It's true," Ross admitted, his voice hoarse. "Everything they said is true." Chaos erupted. Reporters clamored for statements, cameras flashed in rapid succession, and Henry Parker made a futile attempt to leave, only to be intercepted by more agents. Amid the storm of activity, Thomas met Ella's gaze. Her eyes shone with a mixture of relief and sadness, tempered by a quiet hope. He reached out, and she took his hand, their fingers intertwining in silent solidarity. Hours later, as the chaos subsided, Thomas and Ella found themselves on the rooftop of the Parker building. The setting sun cast a warm glow over Queens, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. "It's over," Ella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's finally over." Thomas wrapped his arms around her, his voice soft yet resolute. "No, my love," he murmured. "This is just the beginning." They stood there, enveloped in each other's warmth, as the city below buzzed with its usual rhythm, unaware of the revolution that had unfolded within its corporate walls. "What happens now?" Ella asked, tilting her head to look at him. Thomas smiled, his expression full of determination. "Now we rebuild not just our lives but the company. We'll transform Parker Enterprises into something we can be proud of, something that truly makes a difference in the world." Ella's heart swelled with admiration and love for the man who had risked everything to stand for truth and justice. "Together," she asked, her lips curving into a soft smile. "Together," Thomas replied, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. As twilight gave way to night, and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Thomas and Ella stood entwined, their hearts aligned in purpose and love. They had faced the worst the corporate world could throw at them and emerged not only unbroken but stronger and more united than ever. The road ahead would be steep and fraught with challenges, but they were ready. Together they looked to the future with unwavering hope, a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Night fell over Queens, wrapping the city in its velvety embrace. But for Thomas and Ella, it marked the dawn of a new era, an era defined by integrity, love, and second chances. Together they were ready to face whatever came next, side by side. Thomas Parker stood on the balcony of his Queens apartment, the first rays of dawn illuminating the city skyline before him. It had been weeks since the explosive press conference that exposed decades of corruption within Parker Enterprises. Although the scandal had brought public scrutiny and private turmoil, it had also forged a bond between him and Ella that was unshakable. As he watched the city awaken, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a fragile but undeniable belief that the hardest part was behind them. Ella joined him moments later, her soft footsteps on the balcony barely audible. She handed him a steaming cup of coffee, her presence as grounding as the warmth of the morning sun. "Lost in thought again?" she asked, her voice tender. Thomas smiled, his gaze shifting to her. "Not lost, exactly. Just thinking about everything that lies ahead. There's so much to rebuild, so much to make right." Ella sipped her coffee and nodded. "It feels overwhelming sometimes, doesn't it? But at least we're starting from a place of honesty. That's something." Thomas reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll do it together. You've shown me what truly matters: integrity, purpose, and courage. We'll turn Parker Enterprises into something extraordinary." Their mornings had become a ritual of quiet determination, each day presenting new challenges. The once powerful Parker Enterprises was now a shadow of its former self. Public trust was shattered, and the boardroom, once bustling with influential figures, was now sparsely filled with loyalists determined to rebuild. Ella became Thomas's closest ally, her sharp mind and unrelenting optimism propelling them forward. Together, they crafted a new vision for the company, one that prioritized ethical practices, community engagement, and sustainable innovation. One morning, Ella presented Thomas with a thick folder filled with detailed plans. "This is what we need to show the world that Parker Enterprises has truly changed," she said, her voice steady but hopeful. Thomas flipped through the pages, his admiration for her growing with every word. "Ella, this is incredible. You've thought of everything." She smiled modestly, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of pride. "It's just a start. The hard part will be convincing people to trust us again." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his gaze meeting hers. "Then we'll show them. Not with promises, but with actions. We'll make this company into what it should have always been." Their days blurred into weeks, filled with late-night strategy sessions and relentless efforts to repair the company's reputation. Yet, amidst the professional chaos, their personal connection deepened. They found solace in each other, their shared purpose evolving into an undeniable affection. One evening, after hours of reviewing proposals, Thomas looked up from his notes to find Ella staring at him thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder if people will always see us through the lens of the scandal?" she asked softly. "Like no matter what we do, we'll always be tied to the past." Thomas set his pen down, his expression earnest. "I'd be lying if I said it hadn't crossed my mind. But then I remember that we're not defined by what happened, we're defined by how we move forward. And as long as we keep fighting, I believe we can create something beautiful out of this mess." Ella's lips curved into a small smile. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," he admitted. "But having you by my side makes it possible." The turning point for Parker Enterprises came months later at a high-profile event hosted at the Royal Empress Hall. The grand ballroom was a testament to their hard work, filled with displays of the company's new initiatives, clean energy projects, scholarships for underprivileged youth, and partnerships with ethical suppliers. As Thomas took the stage to deliver his speech, he felt a mix of nerves and pride. But when his eyes found Ella in the audience, her encouraging smile steadied him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong but heartfelt, "tonight isn't just about Parker Enterprises. It's about accountability and the belief that we can always choose to be better. This company has made mistakes I deeply regret. But today we are committing to a new path, one rooted in transparency, integrity, and service to our community." The applause that followed was thunderous, and as Thomas stepped off the stage, Ella greeted him with a radiant smile. "You were amazing," she said, her voice brimming with pride. "So were you," he replied, taking her hand. "None of this would have been possible without you." Their professional triumphs mirrored the growth of their personal lives. Quiet evenings spent cooking together became their sanctuary, their laughter filling the apartment as they navigated the delicate balance of work and love. Their bond, forged in adversity, grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as they strolled through a park bathed in the golden hues of sunset, Thomas stopped abruptly. Ella turned to him, her expression curious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a delicate diamond ring. "I never expected to find someone like you," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to describe. Ella, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Thomas. 1,000 times yes." Their engagement marked a new chapter, not just for their relationship, but for the company they had worked so tirelessly to rebuild. Parker Enterprises thrived under their leadership, becoming a beacon of change in the corporate world. Together, they proved that even in the face of immense adversity, it was possible to rebuild with integrity and purpose. Years later, as they stood on the rooftop of the newly restored Parker building, Thomas wrapped an arm around Ella's waist. The city stretched out before them, alive with possibility. "Can you believe where we started?" he asked, his tone tinged with awe. Ella laughed softly. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. But I wouldn't trade a single moment, not even the hard ones." Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. "Every challenge brought us here to this moment, to this life we've built together." As the stars twinkled above Queens, Thomas and Ella knew their journey was far from over. Together, they would face whatever came next, armed with the lessons of their past and the strength of their love. Their story, shaped by resilience and hope, was only just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright, full of promise and purpose. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of redemption, resilience, and love. Thomas and Ella's story is a testament to the power of second chances, how even the deepest betrayals and the hardest trials can pave the way for something extraordinary. Together, they rebuilt a shattered empire and discovered the beauty of true love, showing us that integrity and perseverance can overcome even the darkest of times. Through their struggles, we witnessed the importance of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Their journey reminds us that with courage, hope, and the support of those who believe in us, anything is possible. Whether it was confronting painful truths, restoring a broken company, or finding love amidst the chaos, Thomas and Ella proved that transformation begins when we choose to face life's challenges with honesty and heart. If this story moved you as much as it moved us, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments below. Did you connect with their challenges? Was there a moment that resonated deeply with you? Let us know how this story inspired you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends and loved ones. Your support helps us continue creating heartfelt stories like this one, filled with emotions, lessons, and inspiration. Together, we can spread stories that uplift and remind us all of the strength of the human spirit. Stay tuned for more incredible tales that will touch your heart and spark your imagination. Thank you for watching. We can't wait to see you in the next chapter.